All right, let's get into a medical mystery that's been hiding in plain sight for over 100 years. It's a fascinating story about two injuries. They were practically twins, born from the same sport, around the same time, but their fates couldn't have been more different. One became this well-known workplace injury, while the other, well, it was basically ignored by the medical world for decades. So let's figure out why.
Okay, so let's meet our two main characters here. On one side, you've got tennis leg. It's this really painful calf injury, and it was first described way back in 1883. Then, on the other side, you've got tennis elbow, a tendon injury that was identified just a year earlier. I mean, look at this. Both maimed for lawn tennis, both pop up at the same time. They really seem like two sides of the same coin, right? Well, this is where our story starts to get really, really interesting.
And here it is, the central question of this whole thing. How is it possible that tennis elbow was quickly recognized as something that happens on the job, while tennis leg was pretty much just seen as a sports injury for over a century? And, this isn't just some random piece of history. This puzzle had real-world consequences. It literally affected people's ability to get medical care and compensation for injuries they got at work. So what happened? How did a simple name create such a massive historical blind spot?
To solve this mystery, we've got to rewind the clock all the way back to the 1880s. Both of these conditions show up in medical journals tied to tennis, and they typically affect middle-aged adults, people who are right in the prime of their working lives. So they have this perfectly parallel origin story, which just makes the fact that their paths diverged so dramatically even weirder. So with tennis elbow, doctors caught on almost immediately. They saw that the repetitive arm motion of a tennis backhand was, well, pretty much identical to the motions used in all sorts of manual labor jobs. By the early 1900s, it was totally common to see tennis elbow linked to carpenters swinging hammers or bricklayers lifting heavy bricks. The connection between the tennis court and the construction site, it was a no-brainer. But for tennis leg, yeah, the story was completely different. Even though the kind of sudden lunge or push-off that causes it could happen absolutely anywhere, we're talking climbing a ladder, stepping off a curb, lifting something heavy, the medical world just kept it locked in that sports injury box. For some reason, that connection to the workplace was just missed, completely overlooked. So, to figure out why, we have to put on our detective hats and start following the paper trail. And believe me, the first big clue we find is a real bombshell. It comes from a simple search of PubMed, which is one of the biggest medical research databases out there. And what that search uncovered is pretty staggering. Get ready for this. When researchers searched for articles linking these injuries to the workplace, they found 193 articles for tennis elbow. And for tennis leg, 1. A single lonely mention. I mean, that's not just a small difference, it's a massive, glaring chasm in the medical literature. It's unbelievable. And just to put that into perspective for you, that means that nearly 10% of all the medical articles published about tennis elbow were specifically about how it was connected to work. It was a huge part of the conversation. For tennis leg, that conversation it didn't even exist. There was basically silence. But here's the crazy part, the big twist. It's not that these injuries weren't happening at work. Oh, they absolutely were. The problem was the stories were being told in places that doctors just weren't looking. They were effectively lost to medical history. And this timeline just lays it all out there. After tennis leg is first described in 1883, the very first documented work-related case we can find pops up in 1917. Okay, but when was the next one published in a medical journal? Not until 2019. That is a 102-year gap, a whole century where this workplace injury was basically invisible to the medical community. And that 1917 case is such a great story. It was a builder in the UK. He was stooping down to push a wheelbarrow when he felt this sudden sharp pain. He thought someone had thrown a rock at his leg as a joke. It's a classic description of tennis leg. And get this, he actually won his workers' compensation claim. But here's the kicker. His story was published in The Builder, a construction trade journal, not a medical one. So the people who needed to see it most, the doctors, they never did. And he wasn't the only one. There were other reports from that era describing clear-cut workplace accidents. A guy falling off a ladder, another falling while carrying a huge weight, someone hurt while lifting a massive block of ice. All these injuries resulted in what we now know is tennis leg. But, and this is so important, the reports never used the words occupational or work-related. The dots were there, but nobody was connecting them. So what is going on here? If it wasn't just the sporty name that threw everyone off,
Why did these two injuries have such wildly different histories? The answer, it turns out, is all about how we classify things and how we perceive them.
And this brings us to this really key concept, nosology. Now I know, it's a fancy word, but all it really means is how we classify diseases. And how we name and categorize an injury fundamentally shapes how we think about what causes it. It creates a kind of mental shortcut. And in this case, that shortcut led to a massive, century-long blind spot. So the real difference, the core of it all, comes down to this. Tennis leg is an acute trauma. It's a single, sudden event, a pop. It can happen anywhere, doing almost anything. But tennis elbow, that's a repetitive trauma. It's an injury from wear and tear, from doing the same motion over and over and over again. Its cause is directly tied to a specific, repeated task, like hammering nails all day long. And there it is. That's the solution to our mystery. Think about it from an employer's or a doctor's perspective back then. The slow, grinding damage of tennis elbow was an obvious result of a specific job. You could see the cause and effect. But a sudden snap in the leg from a seemingly minor movement, like just climbing up some stairs, that was way easier to dismiss. It might have even made them suspicious that the worker was, malingering or faking it. And that bias is what caused the connection to work to be systematically ignored for 100 years. So you see, this isn't just some dusty old story from medical journals. This historical quirk has had very real consequences for people. Even today, the labels we attach to things really, truly matter. They can literally shape people's lives. So what's the big takeaway here? Well, first, names aren't just names. They create these powerful shortcuts in our brains that can totally shape how we see the world. Second, these historical blind spots can actually stop people from getting the diagnosis, the care, and the compensation they deserve. And finally, it's just this incredible reminder for everyone, especially doctors, to always look beyond the label. You have to dig deeper to find the real story behind an injury. And that just leaves us with one final big question to think about. The story of tennis leg shows us just how easily we can be led astray by a simple name. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other things, in medicine or even just in our daily lives, are we completely misinterpreting all because of a label someone happened to stick on it a long, long time ago?